We only have an hour for this, and we're expecting close to 200 people. This is going to definitely set a record for our most well-attended clean air conversation. So I'm going to get going and welcome you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Lyou. I'm the president and CEO of the Coalition for Clean Air. And if you don't know Coalition for Clean Air has spent the past 52 years protecting public health, improving air quality, and preventing climate change. And this year, as part of our year-end giving campaign, we're taking a look back at the history of air quality advocacy. So thank you for joining me. And this is our clean air conversation about Abramowitz versus EPA, the precedent-setting lawsuit brought by the one and only Mark Abramowitz, who we'll hear from shortly. And we couldn't think of a better way to kick off our retro CCA year-end celebration than to do it this way. So here's what's going to happen over the course of the next hour. I'm going to review some housekeeping items, and then we're going to hear from Mark, and he's going to talk about the lawsuit and the aftermath of the lawsuit. And if we stay on track, there's going to be 15 minutes or so at the end for questions and answers. And we ask that you put your questions into the chat. You should all be able to use the chat, and I guarantee that this is going to go by really, really, really quickly. And before I forget, I'd like to invite all of you to join us at the 2024 Toast to Clearing the Air event that Coalition for Clean Air will host on March 13th next year at the Sutter Club in downtown Sacramento. It always sells out. We're going to have this year California Air Resources Board Chair Leanne Randolph, the governor's senior climate advisor, Lauren Sanchez, and we think he's all but confirmed, Senator Henry Stern. So we believe he's going to be joining us too. Please join us at the Toast to Clearing the Air. So on to housekeeping. Here's what we suggest. If you go up to the right-hand corner, well, if you're on a PC, if you can hit the speaker gallery, the speaker view and the gallery thing, it'll work better. So it should be in the top right-hand corner of your screen. And also, if you can, please keep your mic on mute unless you're one of our speakers. We do have staff who can mute you if they have to, but it's better if you do it yourself. We use this format where you can unmute yourself because it allows us to have everyone to have access to the chat and also have personal messages back and forth to people who are attending. We are recording this event and we will post it to our website. So like everything nowadays, don't say or do anything you don't want the whole world to see. And that's kind of it for housekeeping. So without further ado, we are going to go into the conversation about and with Mark Abramowitz. And I do see that there are some people who are involved here in Abramowitz versus EPA. So maybe they're going to join us too for a little bit of this. But Mark is a former Coalition for Clean Air volunteer, staff member, board member, and most importantly, a bit of an air quality legend. In 1984, Mark was the David in what was certainly one of the biggest, if not the biggest, David versus Goliath lawsuits ever filed against the United States Environmental Protection Agency. In Abramowitz versus EPA, Mark fought to defend the fundamental viability of the Clean Air Act by going to federal court to ensure that the South Coast Air Quality Management District had a realistic and meaningful plan to improve air quality in the Los Angeles basin and get to attainment of federal air quality standards. So, Mark, are you ready? Got to come off mute.
Yes, I am. Although I see Dan Salmi giving me a look. So
yeah, I know Dan's gonna come up in this. So, okay, let's start in the beginning, Mark. What the hell were you thinking? And what prompted you to take on the South Coast Air Quality Management District and EPA?
Well, I was there at CBE's Pico Boulevard offices in Los Angeles, minding my own business, working on some role that South Coast was involved in. And I get a call from EPA's liaison to South Coast. And she said, you know, Mark, we just took action to approve the 1982 AQMP for South Coast. And, you know, if somebody doesn't challenge it, it's all over. This plan provides for improving air quality until 1992. And then air quality was going to deteriorate after that just from emissions growth. And so I said, oh, well, thank you for calling me, Lucille. And I just felt this feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I went into a panic, and I just said, you know, what am I going to do? And so I called my boss at CBE, and I said, you know, this is the deal, and we've only got like a week or two to be able to file a challenge. And next year, by the way, is the 40th anniversary of that call. And so my boss said she'd get back to me, and she got back to me and said, you know, I'm not sure how this is going to affect our reputation. You know, I think we're going to pass on it, but, you know, you can do whatever you want on it as an individual. And I said, oh, gee, thanks. And I talked to folks at the Coalition for Clean Air. I was vice chair at the coalition, and contacted some other folks, and everybody decided to pass given the short time frame. So I called up, so somebody suggested that I call Fred Wucher at Clippy, now of Strumwasser and Wucher, who represents the hearing board. And Fred said that he would help me out and draft a petition for review. And it was basically, excuse me, just one paragraph that says, I hereby challenge the decision of EPA, blah, blah, blah. And that was, you know, that was kind of the beginning.
So Lucille Van Amber, right? I mean,
Lucille Van Omering.
Yes. She blows the whistle at EPA Region 9. You scramble to get the lawsuit filed, and none of the usual suspect environmental groups had the sense or courage to join you. And now you have to figure out how to win this lawsuit, or the Clean Air Act is going to be pretty much functionally useless, because no one's ever going to have to come up with a plan that actually gets stuff done, right? So no pressure at all, Mark. How old were you at that time?
26.
26 in 1984. So tell us what happened when you filed the lawsuit. What was the reaction? And then what did you do next?
So I had to file it on behalf of myself because I had really no attorney, and Clippy didn't want to take it on. Fred didn't have the time, but Fred said, I'll help. And somehow the name Dan Selmy was sent to me as somebody who might be interested. Dan was a professor at Loyola Law School, and Nick Argumbaugh, who was CBE's, who had been CBE's attorney, offered to help out. And so I gave Dan a call, and you know, Dan said, "Oh yeah, I'll take it on." And then I tried to get other folks to jump on, still unsuccessfully. At some point, well, we then worked out actually a settlement agreement with EPA, and it was to implement a program called the Reasonable Extra Efforts Program, because of course South Coast was making reasonable efforts to attain the standard. So it was reasonable extra efforts. Well, fine. And we took a year to negotiate that, and we got some stays, and finally the court said, it's time to fish or cut bait, because EPA had asked for public comment on the REAP program, because some of the Congress people from the Detroit area were telling EPA what you're doing was not legal. And yeah, they were probably right. But the automobile manufacturers certainly didn't want to see any of this happen. So I remember,
didn't want to see reasonable efforts being made to clean up the
air. They did not want to see the future that we knew was going to happen. And so EPA then reneged on the settlement agreement. And so we went back to court, and I remember at the court in Pasadena, Dan started speaking, and he barely got 3 words out. And I remember Judge Wiggins said, "Mr. Salmi, why do you want to shut down why does your client want to shut down Los Angeles?" And Dan kind of, didn't expect that. And I'm not sure he's quite recovered from that. We'll have to see what he has to say about
Dan,
that.
is this how you remember it, Dan?
I do remember I got the first question. I don't think I even got to the podium, which is, if you're a lawyer, it's actually a really good sign, because it shows that the court's really interested in the case. And I think I got over the shell shock pretty quick, because there were a lot more questions.
Okay, Mark, so what happened next?
So it was really a slam dunk case. And meanwhile, though, with all of this happening, there were congressional hearings, there were hearings in the state legislature. The South Coast Board, which had decided not to do a rideshare rule that the coalition badly wanted, reversed itself and adopted a rideshare rule, which was really innovative, as innovative as the warehouse rule recently passed was, and actually was the first rule to give industries an opportunity to pick the way in which they wanted to comply and get to a specific standard. Unfortunately, the current South Coast rule on that is kind of like a dead shadow of the previous rule. And actually, let me step back. At some point, after the case started up again, I got a notice that virtually all the utilities in the entire country were filing to intervene on the side of EPA, as was the LA Chamber, and as was WOGA, which at the time was the name of the Western States Petroleum Association. It was the Western Oil and Gas Association. So I came across in my files kind of a help note to environmental and other organizations saying, all these people are lined up against me. Please come and intervene on my side. And some of those groups did. That was kind of scary, because it was, it was like everybody. So
yeah, and it was full employment for industry attorneys. You created a sub-economy there.
Bob Wyman, who represented the chamber, I think it turned him into the big rainmaker there. And he did very well as a result of that. So we won the case. It was a unanimous opinion, and EPA had to go ahead and disapprove the plan. And so there we were.
And the problem with the plan, tell us about why the plan was problematic to begin with.
So the plan didn't meet the requirements of the Clean Air Act. There was no attainment shown by any date. And in fact, South Coast admitted by 1992, it was going to get better. And then all of a sudden emissions growth was going to overcome that.
So, I mean, in reality, we actually did reduce emissions over time. We still have had challenges getting to attainment.
Yeah, and actually, if your staff could pull up the slide, one of the slides there, which show the trend, one of the ones
that, Jordan.
Yeah, Jordan, you there?
Yeah. Which one do you want to show? We have 3.
Okay. Give me the one which show 1 hour ozone trends
over time.
Yep. So there's 1983 when I filed the lawsuit. There's 87 when it was decided. And one of the big things that happened was in 1990, we finally got a ZEV mandate, which absolutely was not happening. And you can see as the South Coast measures, and there were a bunch of brand new measures, they started to come into play. Air quality started getting better.
Fewer days of non-attainment in the basin.
Yeah, and actually there's another 1 hour one which shows the number of episodes. And if you could maybe pull that one up.
Okay, so we have here health advisories and stage 1 smog alerts.
Yep.
Which,
so you can see that the advisories and episodes just really quickly dropped.
Yeah, and that 2021 is probably wildfires, right? Or is it ozone? No, it's ozone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know we had a health advisory in 2020. But yeah, we haven't had even a stage 1. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember stage 3 smog alerts, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't seen any stage 3 since I've been in Los Angeles, but you've been around here longer than I
have. But not a single stage 1 since what, 1998 or 97 actually, I think it was, right?
And we haven't had stage 2 in just so many years.
Yeah.
So if you look at 1992, when air quality was going to get better until then, and all of a sudden it was going to start getting worse, and I should have marked it on here.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see that as a result of the actions that South Coast took and that CARB took, we really have had a significant improvement.
Yeah, and I mean, EPA did some things too, right?
EPA did, EPA did some stuff. What's kind of interesting is that EPA viewed it as a federal state partnership, the Clean Air Act. And nowadays we know that the federal part of that partnership has been lacking. So, maybe it's time for a FIP to...
South Coast has made it pretty clear that we ain't getting there without EPA's efforts. All right. So Jordan, you can take the slide down. And so you had to file this directly in the Court of Appeals, Federal Court of Appeals, right? In San Francisco.
Right.
And then they ruled, thanks in part, large measure to Dan Selmy, they ruled in your favor. And I'll just, as an aside here, I will tell you that in around 1991, 92, I was working at Committee to Bridge the Gap, and we were coming up against this impossible task of stopping the state of California from siting a radioactive waste dump in Ward Valley, California. And there was a really pretty pathetic environmental impact report that had been done. But the record was 120,000 pages. And we needed a lawyer to take on this impossible case. And someone came to us and said, you should talk to Dan Selmy. And certainly Dan and a couple of others stood up and took this case on and helped win at the Superior Court level. And eventually that victory helped stop that radioactive waste dump from going in not too far from the Colorado River on sacred Native American land. So Dan,
Well, Dan is a certain guy.
yeah.
You got another 30 years in you for these things, right, Dan? No, he says.
Yeah, well,
I was happy to hear that I was Mark's last choice to find a lawyer anywhere. I also was happy to hear that it was a slam dunk, because it actually wasn't for a sort of strange reason. Was and we should probably mention Nick Argombaugh, because Nick really did a lot of work on the case for Mark too. The federal government argued we brought the case in the wrong court. Should have been in the district court, and there was some uncertainty about that, and we were really worried that at the end of all this we were going to get an order saying you filed it in the wrong court. But fortunately, we didn't.
Because now with everyone, I mean, it's been so well established now that you go straight to appellate court. That's just what everybody does. No one thinks.
Yeah, it had to do with what EPA did. They sort of left themselves open. It's not worth going into for non.
Yeah. Interesting. The things you discover about the Clean Air Act. Okay, so Court of Appeals, Mark, they tell EPA, you got to follow the law, you got to prepare your own plan. And then what happened, or more importantly, what didn't happen when they were supposed to prepare their own plan?
EPA's words, by the way, is that EPA had to, quote, face up to implementing the measures which are to be triggered by failure to meet attainment requirements, which was code for you got to do a FIP, a federal implementation plan. The feds need to step in and prepare their own plan. And so we knew EPA wasn't going to do it immediately. They weren't going to do it at all unless forced. And so the Coalition for Clean Air this time took the lead on it, and there was a case filed called Coalition for Clean Air versus EPA. And in that case, and by the way, Dan was really not my last choice. One conversation, and I was really excited to have Dan. Dan did a absolutely phenomenal job. And I don't know what Nick did, but I'm sure he did a great and tremendous amount of work, because Nick was an absolute genius. And unfortunately, he passed away just a few years ago, I just learned. So another lawsuit was filed. And this time, the coalition was represented by Alan Waltner, who also represented the coalition, represented the interveners on my side, the environmental interveners on my side. And I had also worked with Alan in one of the California versus Watts lawsuits during a negotiated rulemaking on offshore air quality regulations. So Alan represented
Secretary of Interior James Watts, right?
Yeah. That administration had some interesting environmental leadership there. By the time I was engaged, Ann Gorsuch, who was the mother of our Supreme Court justice, was either had to resign or was kicked out of being EPA administrator. So the coalition filed a suit. There were environmental interveners, and actually, I just read the case this morning, and by this time, I was not involved with the coalition. I was on the hearing board at South Coast, and so I wasn't really following any of this. But the coalition actually lost in district court, and then went to the Court of Appeals, and won there. So EPA, though by this time actually filed, they prepared a draft FIP because they knew they were going to have to do it, particularly after the lawsuit happened, and it was designed to basically get everybody to say it was outrageous. And in fact, a reporter called me up and said, EPA just proposed this thing. Bob Wyman of the chamber says it's an outrageous plan and it's onerous. And I said, I agree with Bob Wyman, which is not what EPA was expecting. And I basically trashed EPA for proposing a plan that didn't have the elements that they could have actually put in. So the coalition won its lawsuit, and what happened after that? Well, the FIP was withdrawn for some reason. The draft one. It was a draft one, and it was never final.
So that one, I mean, that case was named the son of Abramowitz, because we had Abramowitz versus EPA, and that was the son of Abramowitz case, right? And the FIP that was proposed included a proposal for no drive days in Los Angeles,
Right?
based off your
Right.
license plate number. You could either drive or not drive depending on what your license plate number was on certain days.
But mine said fight smog. Which
Yeah.
days would to drive?
I would have to read it again, but I actually have taken that out of the Federal Register notice. I have taken that proposal for no drive days and used it to show it to people that what the consequences could be for non-attainment. But yeah, there was a provision for people who didn't have numbers in their license plate, and we do have that license plate still. Your fight smog license plate.
It's in the coalition offices. Yeah.
It is in downtown Los Angeles. Anyone ever wants to come see it. So okay, so looking back on all this, Mark, what would you say has been the long-term impacts of Abramowitz versus EPA and son of Abramowitz cases? And, you know, what effects did they have on air quality advocacy, the attainment plans, the regulations, and agency accountability, especially here in California?
Well, if we accept the premise of South Coast and EPA that air quality was going to start deteriorating around 1992, from horrible air quality, hundreds of days of exceedances, then you've got just a tremendous impact in terms of the ZEV mandate. You have changes in agencies, and actually the threat of a FIP, which actually was starting to come to be. And I remember Barbara Baird telling the South Coast board that when board members would say, oh, is anybody really going to do a FIP? I mean, that's ridiculous. And she could immediately point to that case. It's also created just a lot of jobs, you know, with new technologies, and there's been encouragement for all these new technologies, whether they be on stationary sources, motor vehicles, and even at South Coast.
Paints, right? And all the low and no VOC paints as a result.
Yep. Yeah. So just a lot of, you know, it's just really exciting. All the new jobs from new technologies, new ways of doing things. things that we just could never have imagined. And we've had tremendous amount of, despite Jug Wiggins's talk about shutting down Los Angeles, we had unprecedented growth in the region subsequent to that, and we've started developing real centers of new technologies here in California. So just, it's just different jobs. And I think we're on our way to a brand new renaissance in terms of some of those. We just have to beat a little harder on South Coast and EPA and CARB.
So what do you think if we ask Dan Selmy to take up the mantle again? Because January 1st of this year, we had a very important ozone standard compliance deadline that seemed to pass with no one really paying attention to it. And now we've missed the deadline and there doesn't seem to be any consequences. There's no FIP, there's no 2-to-1 offset requirement, there's no taking away of federal transportation dollars. Where's the grandson of Abramowitz?
It's funny, just a couple of years ago, somebody said to me, is it time for grandson of Abramowitz? And I declined, but I think Dan looks kind of ready. He
looks ready to me
in there. And every attorney I've talked to just, honestly have just really been just really complimentary of the job that Dan did. And this will be perfect for him, right Dan?
I think so. I think that my time in this is past. I do want to, Joe, I want to just reiterate one thing you said, though, is how much out of the limb Mark went on this. I mean, he's described how nobody else wanted to join him. The array of industry against him in this case was everybody you could think of, and yet he pursued it. And I think we really owe him all our thanks for his persistence.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's a big reason for doing this, and coming from you, that really means a lot. So, Mark, yeah, that was it was a bit crazy, but also really necessary. I mean, we can't underestimate how important this. Overestimate how important this was, because no one had really enforced the Clean Air Act like this before, and no one had really called out. No plans had been proposed, and when the plan wasn't sufficient to get us where we needed to go, no one had called out an agency and held them accountable. So, Mark, thank you for that. And one last question, and then we'll get to the Q&A stuff, because I know there's a lot of questions. And I mean, there's probably a whole another generation of attorneys and advocates who can and should pick up from where you left off here, and think about the grandson of Abramowitz lawsuit that might actually get EPA to do what they need to do to get us to attainment in this smoggiest air basin in the country. But a few years ago, we were at UCLA in the afternoon and guest lecturing for Cliff Gladstein, undergraduate class on air quality, and you were there talking about Abramowitz versus EPA, and you had some advice for those students. And so I want you to share with everyone here today what you told those students about getting involved and being advocates, and what advice you have for that next generation of people who care about improving air quality and preventing climate change.
Well, as a UCLA graduate, I think my first bit of advice to them was SC sucks. And
I think it was, yes.
Yeah. I told them that don't be afraid. Just jump in with both feet and just do it. I did that. I was very young in my career. I had no reputation to spoil. And I just jumped in and I had a ball, and they should figure out what excites them, and go do it. And there's that famous comment which says that somebody who does what they like doing never works a day in their life. And I've come pretty close to that. And during that time period was probably the most exciting in many ways and best period of my life. And it was just jumping in with both feet and not knowing what's going to happen, and knowing that there was some sane person like Dan Selmy there to kind of keep me from going too crazy.
Yeah, I thought you were, as a hockey fan, I thought you were going to say you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. But it's the same idea. You got to get involved and you got to do something. And the nice thing about, we got our problems in this country, but the nice thing is that when you do get involved, you can and make a huge difference, which you did, Mark. So I know there's questions in the chat. They've been flying by. I've kind of been seeing, but I think Nicole's been keeping track. Nicole, were there questions that we wanted to bring up for Mark or me?
Yeah, we've got a couple, and if people will have more questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat now, and we'll get to them. We had David Schonbrun asked if it would be fair to say that the 80s and 90s were the heyday of environmental litigation, and it doesn't seem like there are big precedent-setting cases anymore.
Wow, that's a good question. The 80s were great. There was my lawsuit, and then I worked with some of the other areas in California and outside California on similar type lawsuits elsewhere. That was really exciting. But there have been some other exciting ones, certainly more recently. The Coalition for Clean Air was involved in China shipping, which was also some really important litigation and led to some really important air quality reductions. Just watch what the coalition is doing, and you'll see all the great stuff that's happening in litigation. There are other groups doing great litigation too. Back then there wasn't really much in the way of organizations down here.
Yeah, there's
which
a bit
is
of a cottage industry of groups that file deadline lawsuits under the Clean Air Act. It seems to me that
great.
Maybe not as much progress is made under the Clean Air Act, other than the deadline lawsuits, which forces EPA to actually do things according to the law. But it seems to me like most of the environmental lawsuits that are successful and make a big difference tend to be the sequel lawsuits at this point for the big important cases.
Yeah, you use whatever the best tool is going to be for that particular case or that particular issue.
And you mentioned China shipping. We should note that I think the initial lawsuit that was filed with the assistance of the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and co-plaintiffs, the community homeowners associations down in the San Pedro area. That was filed in 2001. We still have an active lawsuit. We're awaiting a appellate court decision that should come up in the next month, 2 months or so. So that China shipping lawsuit is still ongoing, but it was one of the really important things before my time. It was Gail Rudiman-Fuhr and Todd Campbell and Julie Masters, now Julie Prusak, and others who worked really hard on putting together that lawsuit. But it did send a message, and there were a lot more CEQA environmental impact reports that were done because of it down at the ports. There was a lot more mitigation that was adopted because of it. But the ports remain our biggest source of air pollution and a big challenge. So I don't know, Mark, what do you think, based off your experience with port issues? Where are we and where do we need to go?
Actually, one of the sticking points on settlement of the case for the first settlement was actually EPA doing something about the ports. And I gave up on that one. But, and I see somebody from Long Beach Container Terminal is here. I mean, talk about excitement. Remember, Joe, you and I and some of the staff went over there as they were building that thing. I mean, talk about, you've got an electrified terminal there, and that is so exciting to me. Now, I frankly thought they should have used fuel cells in some of their operations.
That's because you have a hydrogen bias, but that's okay.
Rather than batteries, but it's zero emission. I don't care how you get there, but it would have never happened without China shipping. Absolutely. And the reductions in emissions at port, you're talking over 80% reduction. I mean, boy, that's, talk about things that make me fall over with excitement. I mean, that's one of the things. So,
I think a Long Beach Container Terminal webinar is in our future too. We were just talking about that this morning. So we're going to go over that at some point. Are there other questions, Nicole?
Yeah, Justin from Lacey, the LA Clean Tech Incubator, wanted to know how come there are no challenges to leaf blower manufacturers and no pollution controls on their fossil fuel units, which I think is a good question considering we're just talking about the legislation that CCA was involved in that's going to take effect next year. So Joe, maybe you can mention that.
Well, Mark and I have spent many years discussing lawn equipment, and if you people don't know, lawnmowers, leaf blowers, things like that, really large volatile organic compound emissions makes our smog much worse, and obviously noisy and annoying too. There are now battery electric devices that can be used for everything, leaf blowing, lawn mowing, and edging, and all of that. But Mark and I like the zero emission alternative, which is a rake and broom.
Yep. A blower is an effective particulate generator.
Yeah,
it's designed to generate particulates.
Yeah, and there is new regulations that are coming into place, and there's also a great program at South Coast Air Quality Management District for turning in your old gas lawnmower and getting basically a free or a big credit toward an electric lawnmower, which are much quieter and still work really well. They're getting better and better all the time.
So yeah, AB 1346 is supposed to go into effect as of January 1st, which will phase out sales of all of the gas-powered small off-road engines over the next few years. And that is actually up in front of the EPA for approval right now, and we're waiting to hear on that. So the cycle never ends. Justin at Lacey also wanted to know if Dan is taking on mentees to carry on his legacy of battling pollution monsters.
Well, I have certainly a number of students that I taught that are working in the area now effectively. I do want to say one thing though about the effect of the case. I mean, the South Coast District became very active after the case. I mean, they really turned around a lot. Mark was working inside of the agency then, and if you're talking about litigation, they adopted rules and were sued by industry in almost every one of them. That you mentioned paints earlier. There were a whole series of paint cases that the district defended. They adopted the fleet rules that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. I remember specifically one involving charcoal lighter fluid. I was involved. The district was nice enough to hire me to help them on those cases, and I mean, so there certainly was a lot of, and most of those rules were upheld. So there was a lot of litigation then. And I think litigation today, a lot of it involves global warming issues. I think there's been a lot of attention to that, certainly, important cases there. So
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of them, important stuff going on in the climate world when it comes to litigation. But yeah, South Coast did turn around. And Mark, one of the things that you had mentioned when you wrote about this was the creation of the Technical Advancement Office at South Coast AQMD. So that, I think, was a direct result of your lawsuit, right?
Yeah, they started that at exactly that time in order to try and answer some of the criticisms.
Some of the best snake oil discovering and blowing the whistle on capacity of anything I've ever seen. If you don't have a genuine solution and it really is snake oil, they'll call you out on it. And that's that Technical Advancement Office and all their monitoring capability, their lab capability, all that stuff is really impressive. That helps with enforcement, it helps with monitoring, it helps solve problems like, hexavalent chromium. I mean, that lab work is done elsewhere, but the hexavalent chromium monitoring and Paramount, all that stuff that happened, we wouldn't have been able to do any of that without that TAO.
And I should mention that, there was the 88 AQMP, which was after all the changes in the district board and management, it was adopted, and it was really a comprehensive look and divided up into tiers based upon the availability of technology, and really laid out quite a blueprint for the future. I wasn't thrilled with it, but it was really a strong movement forward, and it was just extremely exciting to see some of that happen, because it was a direct response to the lawsuit and the fact that EPA may have to prepare a FIP and there may be sanctions for the region.
Yeah. We have any other questions in the chat?
Yes, Rachel Lawson wants to know if you have any suggestions on practical ways that social workers could support CCA focus areas in regard to community engagement and/or advocacy.
I have never had that question before. The easiest thing is always to just support Coalition for Clean Air through your financial contributions, become a member, to make donations. That's the simplest thing. If you'd like to help in terms of community outreach and education, become part of Clean Air Day, and what we do with Clean Air Day to raise awareness, join the mailing list, circulate the information that you learn about, read the blogs, all those things can help to bring you up on what's going on. And every once in a while, on the mailing list, we ask people to contact someone and to get involved. But Clean Air Day is a really great way of just doing at least one thing for clean air once a year to remind you of the importance of clean air and to join others. There's a lot of events. We help sponsor a lot of community events, and we give out these micro grants to community-based organizations to do events. Anything from tree planting to a teach-in to all sorts of other activities that these groups organize. And as part of Clean Air Day, we get a lot of public transit agencies providing free transit on Clean Air Day, which is the first Wednesday of October. So I would suggest really, join in, become part of Clean Air Day, maybe even join the regional planning committees for Clean Air Day, the working groups, and that might be the best thing to do.
Thanks, Joe. And I put the URL for our Clean Air Day website in the chat. It's cleanairday.org. And as Joe mentioned, that's the first Wednesday of October every year. And we work through regional committees all across the state. So there's all kinds of options to get involved in events and activities and partnering with other organizations. A lot of youth organizations participate, do walk to school days, things like that. Andrew Jin Kim wants to know what everyday actions we can do to help support clean air, which ties right in with the things that we suggest people do when they take the pledge on Clean Air Day. Joe, do you want to?
Yeah. And it's not only just cleaning up the air, but it's also reducing your exposure. So one of the Clean Air Day pledges is to replace the air filters in your cabin filter in your vehicle, in your car. A lot of people don't even know those exist, but they get really dirty after a year or so. If you replace them, especially with the charcoal activated ones, they do a really good job of reducing your exposure to particulate matter inside your car. Obviously, clean your and replace your heater, HVAC filters. If you can get them to the highest MERV level possible with your system still working, it reduces your exposure to particulate matters. That's all important. But in Clean Air Day, we suggest things like bring your own lunch to work, so you don't have to go out and get lunch. Walk, take public transit. There's a lot of things you can do. There's the big things. If you own a house, you can put solar on it. You drive an electric vehicle, or don't drive a car at all. I think e-bikes might be the save the planet eventually if we take advantage of the opportunities that they provide. All kinds of stuff that you can do. Induction stoves, electric appliances, HVAC systems can now be replaced. And there's obviously a lot of things that we can all do to help save the planet, reduce air pollution. That's all important. So yeah, thanks for asking.
So we just noticed that our own Chris Chavez has his hand raised to ask a question. Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Actually, yeah, thank you. For those that don't know me, Chris Chavez, I'm the Deputy Policy Director at Coalition for Clean Air. My apologies for not being on camera. I'm actually getting ready to head up to the LA office. What I was going to actually respond to, because I know there's that question about what social workers do to help get involved in our advocacy issues. I think one of the key things also is, for your clients, for people who are, need your assistance and reliance on your services, is, validating their experiences when it comes to things like, asthma, when it comes to the health conditions that they're facing, because air pollution does have an impact on that. So I think being able to say, yeah, this is something where this is impacting your health, this is impacting your life, and looking for opportunities and ways to address those issues and channels and opportunities for them to share their lived experiences and potentially affect a policy outcome. I know there are professional limitations of what you might be able to deal with, but that was just a thought that came across my head. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are huge social and psychological impacts of just the dealing with the extreme problem and threat of climate change, and those, the more you know about air pollution, the more you have to worry about air pollution. So we don't want to discount those impacts at all. And thanks for that advice, Chris. Appreciate it. Mark, we're going to have to wrap up soon. Do you have any closing comments or observations you want to share?
Oh, I think maybe I'll end with something fun. And that is at EPA regional headquarters, when I filed my lawsuit, some staff did a skit at Christmas time, sung to the tune of "We Are the World." That took a little bit of a jab at me. Non-attainment out there is making us despair. Now, how to get Abramowitz out of our hair? We are the staff, we are the workers, we are the ones who push the papers for this nothing burger. What we once thought was great has been wrecked by invertebrates. When will we have cleaner air for you and me?
Okay, Mark, did you ever do a Freedom of Information Act request for the dartboard with your face on it?
I was actually treated with red carpet treatment when I went to visit EPA Region 9 headquarters every time. Staff there was very supportive of what I was doing and very excited about it.
Well, that's funny you should say that. Just about 6 weeks ago, I was up there and I had a couple of hours to spare before jumping on the plane back to Los Angeles, and I went and met with Region 9, and same thing. Wonderful people, great work, all, really trying to do their best. And a lot of them stayed around a little longer than they were supposed to work to talk with me about it. It was a good experience.
Last thing, and I want to speak in favor of attorneys. They always get a bad rap, but you have people like Dan Selmy who do just wonderful work, and Dan specifically has done such incredible work, not only in this lawsuit but in stuff for South Coast. And somebody ought to recognize Dan with and other attorneys with some lifetime achievement awards for their great contribution to clean air, because I can flap my jaw a bit and say let's go sue, but it's people like Dan that actually really make it happen and make it a success. They're the ones that really deserve the credit. I was just a young guy, who did some crazy stuff by suing EPA, and Dan made it a winner.
Thank you. I cannot agree more. Absolutely. So let's work on that. Okay, we're gonna have to wrap up. Jordan, I think you have a slide with a QR code on it for everyone to give the gift of clean air this holiday season. You got that QR code slide? You guys take your phone and click on that. That'll take you to the donation page, right?
Yes, if you snap that with the camera on your phone, it'll take you right to our donation page. You can also visit our website, which is ccair.org, to make a donation, and also to check out our blog series that's been going through the decades of CCA. So if you want to read more stories from Mark and other folks who've been involved since the beginning, we've got the 70s and 80s are up online now, and the 90s and the aughts will be coming shortly. So we hope that you'll check that out if you want to learn more about the history and hear the stories about the legends from CCA's past.
All right, let's leave this up for just another minute or so as people get their phones out and click on it. And I thank you in advance for supporting Coalition for Clean Air. And Mark, thank you to Mark Abramowitz for sharing his tale of woe and intrigue. We thank you, our lungs thank you, and future generations thank you for keeping us on the path to clean air, Mark, all you've done, and Dan and all the other attorneys and everybody else who's helped to do this. I want to also thank our staff members, Jordan Brazil and Nicole Roberts, our new development director, Nicole Roberts, who probably should have introduced, for making this event possible. This has been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank all of you guys. You can take this down. We can all see each other again. Jordan, is that possible? Okay. And other than speaker view, I'm going to go back to gallery view just to take a look at everybody again. So thank you, all of you, for attending and for supporting Coalition for Clean Air. We hope to see you at our Toast to Clearing the Air event on March 13th in Sacramento. May every breath you take be a breath of clean air. Stay safe and have a good day. Happy holidays to everyone. Thank you, guys. Hi, Bonnie. I owe you a call, Bonnie. I'm gonna get in touch with you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Tom Epstein, board chair. He's here too and leaving. There we go. Jerry Jackman, another board member. A boss, good friend, and supporter of Coalition for Clean Air. What a great group of people. That's great. Well, Mark, thank you for all that. Went by fast, didn't it?
It did. It did. That was definitely fun. I hope it turned out as well as you had hoped.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Good suggestions in the chat.
You know what? I didn't even look at the chat.
Well, Barbara Baird posted something. I know Barbara Baird was on.
I just looked at the list and I saw she was on.
wanted to let everyone know the South Coast has filed a lawsuit to compel EPA to act on a 2019 contingency measure plan. I did see that. Which demonstrates the need for measures to reduce emissions from federal sources. This could either have two results. EPA approves it, in which they must implement federal measures, or they disapprove it, and at least in part, in which case EPA will be forced to implement a FIP on itself, basically, to attain the 1997 ozone standard. So maybe facing a FIP again. EPA's deadline for the action is July 1st, 2024. But we should make note of that.
Is it possible to get a copy of the chat notes?
Yeah, I think right. Whoever's Jordan is logged in as Zoom, CCA Zoom,
Correct.
so she can share the chat notes with you and me.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. I've got to run. Jordan, I'm going to head into the office and hand off my my holiday presents and that mail and checks I got for you.
Sounds great. Thank you both for such a
Okay.
wonderful conversation.
On my way.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.